This is Dennis Donahue, and I'm pleased to welcome back to Salinas. So we're doing this together again. My partner and good friend from New Zealand, Peter Van Hilton. Peter, welcome back to Salinas.
It's, as I always say, Dennis, it's always great to be back to Salinas. And I've said this before, it almost feels like a second home. So great to be back and really looking forward to the conversation today with Eric.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a good one. We've got
I agree.
Eric Morgan with us, who is the Vice President of Environmental Science and Resources for Braga Fresh. Eric, thanks for joining us and great to see you. And we're looking forward to the conversation.
Nice to see you two gentlemen as well. Yeah, looking forward to the conversation today.
No,
so.
That's terrific. And I say this in the best sense of the word. You've built up quite a reputation in recent months, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. A good reputation. But before we kind of jump in and get a little topical, talk a little bit about your background and then kind of the run up to your current responsibilities, and then elaborate on what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so kind of, went to Cal Poly, got a degree in fruit science, went to work right away for SoilServe. And I was there for 5 years, and I learned a tremendous amount, about the valley, about pest control. It was really kind of set the foundation. So many different growers, a lot of connections that stem, still, to this day, including the relationship with Braga. They were one of my first customers, right? So really set the foundation there. And then about 2001, Rod Braga asked if I wanted to be an independent pest control advisor, and I said no. And then there was some changes at Wilbur Ellis SoilServe that I wasn't super happy with at that time. Still is a great company to this day, obviously, but I decided to take his offer up and become an independent pest control advisor. Started Morgan Consulting LLC in January of 2001. That business is still in operation today. However, the name changed to Soil Health Lab LLC. As we transitioned out of pest control service, really about 15 years ago, and primarily started to work on soils. And so really, 2008, 2009 is when, I think it was 2008, 2009 is when Braga started doing sales and started, selling their own products. And, one of our first big customers was Whole Foods. And they initially out the gate got started with a responsibly grown program. And I was really the only person in the company that had that kind of technical background that could address the questions that came, the practices that came along with that responsibly grown program. And that really just kind of started my journey into sustainability, and really all of the elements that Whole Foods was looking for nearly 15 years ago are really still what we're working on today on the sustainability side. So transitioning kind of out of the pest control advisor work more into sustainability. And then, of course, that just kind of is now dovetailed into the regenerative side. So Soil Health Lab still in operation today. I have two young men that are running that on a day-to-day basis, and I focus most of my attention on sustainability and regeneration there at the Braga.
Well, we want to talk about that, but pick up a little bit on the importance of soil health. I mean, this is obviously a valley that gets farmed pretty intensively, and and folks are getting ready to head down to the desert. And how critical is that really, and just in terms of quality and obviously crop rotation is part of that, but kind of break that down a little bit more for folks, why that's so critical.
Yeah, it really, the soil health space is relatively new to me. I mean, I got the domain 7 years ago knowing it was going to be a big deal, but really understanding more than, initially my definition of a healthy soil was a soil that a grower could be profitable on. But that has really changed as I've become, more versed on the subject. And really what ultimately the goal of a healthy soil is going to be to, sequester and cycle carbon to some degree, and ultimately to create a symbiotic relationship between the plant that you're growing to harvest and the soil. And ultimately that relationship is going to be the foundation for us, as we move forward and as we lose synthetics. And really it's being driven home even at the retail level. I've had a conversation with a large grower shipper where they've actually, sent soils away at a retailer's request for soil health analysis. So the retailers are involved in this space at this point. Walmart has Project Gigaton, where they're looking to, reduce a gigaton of atmospheric CO2 through their supply chain. So it's really starting at the top with the retailers and trickling down to the shippers and now to the growers. So a healthy soil is really, in my opinion, and for those that are kind of in this space, are going to be the ticket to long-term sustainability, profitability, and everything else that a grower needs to, continue for the long term. So it is kind of the key point at this time.
It's interesting because obviously when we talk a lot about biologicals or the possible loss of synthetics, that sort of thing, we think a lot about that from the regulatory standpoint. I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear you say that the retailers are jumping in around soil health.
Yeah, I mean, and even, going back to that responsibly grown program, they were, on neonicotinoids. Whole Foods had some restrictions around that. They didn't want any carbamates, organophosphates on their products. And so they were, looking at that. But yeah, the retailers are really looking at, what we're doing. I think they understand the needs of the consumers are changing. The millennials and the Gen Z are going to be making different buying decisions than our, my Gen X population and of course the boomers. So I think that these folks spend a lot of time doing market research and understand that consumer trends are changing. And so soil health is going to be one of the big important parts of that. And it's an exciting space to be in too, because what we're figuring out, and this is even with the academics that are well versed in this area, is we don't know a lot. And so we're discovering new stuff all the time that we just don't know. I mean, in a tablespoon, or I can't remember if it's a tablespoon or a teaspoon of healthy soil, there's 8 billion different microbes and just a tremendous abundance of diversity in that. So we have a long way to go, but there's a lot of us that are working actively in this space and pretty excited about it.
Good. Peter, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, look, I think you've created some really interesting insights there, Eric, particularly around kind of the role that retailers are increasingly playing. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about soil health in a moment, but just before I do that, I'd like to take one step back. And for those people who are listening to this podcast, where Braga Fresh might be quite a kind of new name to them. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the scale of the operation in terms of acreage, geographic location, the range of produce, just so people have an understanding or better understanding as to just who Braga Fresh are.
Yeah, so it's a vertically integrated company that's been in operation for nearly 100 years. I think we're at 95 years this year, or maybe even closer. We started in 1928, so getting really close to that 100-year mark. Production in both the Salinas Valley and in the desert, both Yuma and El Centro. Probably 50-60% of what we harvest, ship, and process is our product. We do have other growers that supply us as well, from Oregon and Nevada and to some degree Mexico. I don't have a firm count on the number of acres, but it's enough to where we're employing 1,800 people year round, across the board for the entire operation. So a sizable operation that keeps us all pretty busy.
No, that's great. And I think, again, particularly for some of our international listeners, that does create a bit better context just to understand that whole concept of scale. But going back more specifically, particularly to the area of organics that you're working in, I noticed that one of the brand names that you use is ASA Organics, which Sorry, I was going to ask, before I try and describe that, perhaps you could, Eric, a little bit more about who exactly, or the role that ASA Organics plays within Braga Fresh.
Well, I'll just kind of go over the operation. So there's
Perfect.
really three primary production entities. Braga Ranch is the conventional production entity, and we're about, I would say, 25% conventional still. So all the conventional goes through Braga Ranch. And in the Imperial Valley, our farming operation down there is is ASA Farms, and in the Salinas Valley, our organic growing entity is ASA Organics. As far as labels go, you're primarily going to find our product in the marketplace under the Josie's Organics label. And so that's what consumers will see. In addition to that, so much of what the market is at this point is, private label products. So, the store brand type products, a lot of that product is ours too, but it's not really differentiated in the market from, the other shippers that are also providing those retailers.
Thanks for that explanation. One of the areas I looked at around the certification of operations such as your own includes having long-term soil management plans. And I'm just wondering how baked in that is now, in your view, to that kind of longer-term value proposition for organics and organic farms.
Yeah, I think that really, what growers, the prime thing that a grower needs to look for is, are they able to keep, maintain, and build soil organic matter? And so really that's going to be, the primary metric. And, the more tillage that you employ, the more you're going to be oxidizing that carbon that you sequester in the soil, whether it's through amendments or whether it's through, plant root exudates containing carbons. So yeah, it's about building soil organic matter. There's a whole bunch of other metrics that we can employ, bacterial to fungal ratios, aggregate stability, all sorts of other different things. But primarily what growers need to do is think about how we're going to build soil organic matter. And we focus a lot on cover crops, and that really is making a difference. We cover crop a third of our acreage annually, which is pretty high, compared to the rest of the Salinas Valley. But it's what we need to do. And to be compliant with the regulations that we're facing too from the water board, you're going to have to make sure that you start to close all the exits in our leaky system. And especially when it comes to nitrogen, and cover crops are a great way to do that. At the same time as they start to, grab that excess nitrogen up, they're pushing carbon into the ground too, which is exactly what we need to do to build up our soils.
Great. Dennis.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about, you kind of, and it's interesting to hear going all the way back with Whole Foods and, responsibly grown type of thing. And then, the terminology, begins to evolve and you get into sustainability and now regenerative. And, when I accused you of having a reputation, I mean, you've really emerged as really one of the national thought leaders around regen and specialty crops. Can you talk a little bit about, and I know you and I have had this conversation, regenerative, how would you describe that? What's the practical application of that in specialty crops, and does it vary from, the Midwest? I mean, when we hear no-till out here, we kind of sit back and go, I'm not sure that's going to work for what we do, but I always liked your explanation, but that doesn't mean we can't have less till. So I know that's a lot, but kind of the evolution of the regenerative space, where's it taking us? How does specialty crops differ?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to be tasked by CDFA to help, write kind of the initial draft that the CDFA board will approve for the definition for state policy of regenerative agriculture. That's it's a lot. IFPA has their own definition. It's about a paragraph. It's a lot shorter. But if I were just kind of surmise what, it is in my mind is really, and it will address, any specialty crop, any broadacre crop is really, picking some outcomes, to move you forward. And because you're going to have to meet every grower where they're at. So you can't tell a tuber grower, a carrot or potato grower, they can't till. You can't tell them that because it's imperative that you dig the roots up. And so really you have to decide what the outcome is going to be. The outcome is going to be, some level of a social component. How do you improve stuff for your community? How do you improve stuff for your workers? Using less toxic pesticides decreases that risk and is good for your workers. At the same time, you want to increase the soil health. Well, you can do that with compost. You can do that with cover crops. You can do that with biological amendments to some degree. You can do that with reductions in tillage. So, you're going to have to determine, what outcomes you want to achieve, and then how you move forward, in that regard. So, for leafy greens, we can't integrate livestock and kind of, really, if you take a look at most of the pillars, it's social, it's soil, and it's livestock. And for our market, due to food safety concerns being the paramount, concern that we have for our consumers, ensuring we have a perfectly safe food supply, where we minimize risk, is we can't integrate livestock because of the hazard that creates. But at the same time, in our regeneratively grown organic products, we are introducing, manures, sterilized manures in the form of fertilizer amendments. So there's a little bit of a shortcut there. We're still, adding a lot of carbon. In terms of our fertilizers, our true organic fertilizers that we utilize, they're about a third carbon. So we are adding carbon into the system, but I think it's really, what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve? We're looking to increase the level of CO2 respiration from our soils. We're looking to, increase the ability of the fungal hyphae to help us liberate nutrients from the soil to feed the plant. So, those are the outcomes that we're trying to do. Close the exits for loss of nitrogen. Ensure that we're not, moving sediments to water bodies that could contain phosphates that could cause algal blooms. What are the concerns? Can we utilize less water? If we build soil organic matter, we can hold more water in the soil. So it's going to be outcomes based. It's going to be specific. Tillage is an element for sure. But really you kind of have to think of what the three pillars are, social, livestock, and then soil health, and then try to pick the outcomes that you can achieve relevant, to what you're growing.
So a real broad brushed question, as you know, growers are also always thinking about economic impacts. So what, in your mind, is this evolution change? Is it wholesale? What's the economic impact? Because and without the normal grower lament, it's hard to pass through costs. What is the economic impact of all of this?
And so I think that is huge. I think that is huge. And I was on a pre-panel call earlier this week, and the person in charge of sustainability with Campbell's was on the call. And so I just said exactly what I said right now. And he came back, and of course, Campbell's, who's bigger than Campbell's, right? And he said, it's also about the long-term economic viability of growers. And that is just key. Inflation, costs, the amount of money and time that we spend in tillage and labor, and the crop loss that we have in the current production system, really, that needs to be paramount too in the focus. And I do appreciate you bringing that, because I always kind of get too soil nerdy and kind of forget about the real economic benefits as we start to try to find ways to decrease, the inputs into the system and employ more, natural processes. I like to think of roots as tillage, and really what we're going to be doing this year is seeing how a cover crop can change how much you need to till. Do you need to do your full standard tillage practices after cover crop? I don't think that you do. I think that we're going to be looking this year and seeing, how the soil, with a soil penetrometer, how tough the soil is to penetrate, after rains with standard groundwork in a field in beds versus a field that's sitting there in a cover crop. I think that those cover crops open up the soil so much more. So, we need to be looking and asking ourselves a lot of questions about how we're farming and why we're farming that way, and if there's anything that we can do to reduce our costs and achieve these outcomes that we're looking to do. And I think that they all go hand in hand.
This is a fascinating conversation. You've said, Eric, if we look at Braga, 25% of your operation is conventional. My maths isn't great, but suggests that 75% is not. again, going back to that whole certification model for organic, I noticed one of the other requisites is use of no chemical herbicides, fumigants, or synthetic fertilizers, and no unapproved pesticides on soil or produce. As you probably well know, Dennis and myself are very involved in this new initiative called Platform 10. And one of the words or phrases that's been associated with that is, less chemicals, more biologicals. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, how you analyze emerging technologies in this space, because if you're clearly unable to use hard synthetics, what kind of models or trialing systems do you use to identify alternative options for your operation?
So we've taken a little bit completely different approach, and being an entrepreneur and working for an entrepreneur as well, in having worked with the biological space to some degree, and not really seeing the promises kept that have been brought to me, we decided as a company, that we're going to start doing on-farm research. And so actually what we've done is establish a trial protocol and are going to start charging companies to do at scale on-farm research. And so that's what we're doing. And we're working with 4 or 5 different companies right now that have novel products that we're negotiating with on incorporating them into our production system. And it's pretty robust. I mean, the biggest hurdle that we see so far is the LGMA requirements on biological amendments. And so when folks come to us and they've had good success in perennial crops or in the broadacre crops, they don't have the food safety hurdles that we have in leafy greens. And so the first step we do is we get them to go through, that LGMA verification process where we ensure that the product is safe to apply to our crops. And then we establish trials, and we've done trials, but we haven't done on-farm trials for pay yet. But that's what we want to do. We want to start to evaluate these products in our production system, because a lot of the data that we get are from very kind of small research start state, or greenhouse, type research. And unfortunately, a lot of times I'm presented with pictures of 5 romaine plants on somebody's tailgate, and 3 of the plants have big roots and 2 have small. And I can walk into a romaine field and select those plants myself and do that same demonstration. And it really isn't a gauge of efficacy. So we're excited to actually start to evaluate these products, and at the same time generate additional on-farm revenue at a time when on-farm revenue is something that we need to be focusing on. And really, one of the things that is a little bit different that I will not be employing in these trials is yield. I don't want to look at yield as a metric for success. I want to employ other metrics, because I think for us, yield is a metric of market, and yield is a metric of somebody's discernment in the field, what matches a specification. We're not harvesting corn and soybeans, into a hopper where we have some weight per acre. It's so subjective. Even when it comes to spring mix and spinach harvest, the subjective nature of how high the person puts that sickle, that cutter, could impact yield. And so we want to look at, how does the biological amendment affect soil CO2 respiration? How does it affect the bricks in the plant, which is a measurement of sugar? Does it change the phosphate content in the new leaves? What claim do you have, and what metric can we apply to it? Can we decrease our nitrogen inputs? What can we do? How can we verify it, and really look at it outside of yield? Because I'm just not a big fan of yield in our market.
Well, one of the things. Go ahead.
I'm a fan is yield of a metric.
Yeah,
You like yield.
well, yeah, and I know you've got scorekeepers in Braga Fresh who do
Absolutely.
Yeah, they like yield a lot, but
Yeah.
we're in complete agreement with you. In fact, the grower trial network that we're looking to set up, we're looking to accelerate solutions where there are none, and we really do believe we have to be in a commercial setting, and that means we've got to mitigate risk or cover time. And so in many respects, just my brother-in-law grows seed crops. In many respects, we're looking to grow research crops. And what I like about what you said there's more to this than proof of concept that it quote unquote works. How does it work? What does it work with? What's the impact on the operation? So, we certainly think that's a terrific approach.
And Dennis, we can use Chat GPT now and enter our data and get real statistics. I mean, it like that. It makes it so much easier than what it used to be. So, I mean, we could just populate a table, drop it in, and I did this on some test data, and it even told me that I had duplicate values in there and removed it for me and then ran the statistics. And so we have a whole bunch of tools that we could use that makes it a lot easier for people that aren't statisticians to be able to understand, what we're seeing in the field. So leveraging technology is a big part of this moving forward too. And I really see a lot of my work is trying to figure out where sustainability is and where we are with technology, because the two of those going together is what's going to move us forward.
Boy, that's interesting, because obviously AI and how that's going to play out, a lot of it is going to play out, or there's certainly going to be a real application in the trialing world. And, one of the things, and as hanging around growers, there's a tendency, we're all drinking from a fire hose and we want an answer yesterday type of thing. And to some degree, you can't accelerate trialing, or can you? So for instance, when you're looking at something, how many clicks of the dial do you have to look at? I mean, do you want to see it repeated twice, 2 different seasons? And if you're evaluating something from, okay, I want to use this, how many looks do you have to have at something in your mind?
Well, I think it all comes to trial design, and for us, if we can get replications, right? So we're not going to do a side by side. We're actually going to have enough replications to get, to do real statistics. So it's going to be a minimum. I think we're probably always going to go with like 3 treatments and 3 controls. And then after that, if we can see, and we have different soil types, we can replicate it on essentially any soil type that we see present in the Salinas Valley, because we have a diverse enough, growing operation. So, and initially, we're always going to probably start on the marginal ground. And we find that when you start on the marginal soils and you can see success there, it really translates better to the rest of the soil. So anything that we can kind of get established on our really light sandy soils is probably going to carry over pretty well to the heavier soils as well. Because there's just those lighter soils, there's lower organic matters, lower cation exchange capacities. They don't hold water as well. And so if you can make something work there, it's pretty likely that it's going to be able to move forward into better ground. So that's usually our proving ground, is the bad ground, the marginal ground, I should say.
Okay. Well, and I would be remiss if I let go, because, and even though I was in the industry for a long time and sold processors, so you're schooled to be thinking about food safety. What are the food safety things you're thinking about when you shift from synthetics to biologicals? Because I gather you have to be concerned about the possibility of introductions of new, for a very scientific word, new things in the field, pathogens, et cetera. How big a concern is that, and how attentive to that should folks be?
Well, I would say, just kind of at the top level, if you have an EPA number, my understanding is if you have a federal registration of your product, you are immune from the LGMA regulations.
Okay.
If you do not have a federal EPA number, and then it starts to get to letter of guarantees, you have to have, batch sampling. The person collecting the samples needs to have an 8-hour class. The results per batch need to be provided, to ensure that they don't have E. coli or salmonella associated with them. And as we kind of get into the space where we're, all sorts of different inputs, people looking at everything, there is some concern, when it comes to biology, that you might not have the right biology in there. So I am really supportive of ensuring that what we're trialing, what we're applying, is only going to benefit the crop, which will benefit the consumer, and really mitigating any kind of risk. And so they have a really robust protocol. It's difficult for new folks to get through, but once they do, then it's good. And they do get through it because they are, doing it right for the most part. As long as they're not, fermenting feedlot manure and selling that to us, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. But yeah, there is definitely a process, and as these folks come in the scene, you need to get educated on what the process is because they're not required to do that in other markets. So yeah, there's some hurdles for sure, but the hurdles are there to protect our consumers,
Okay.
and ultimately to protect growers to ensure that they're growing,
Right.
A really healthy crop. So.
You bet. Peter?
Yeah, look, Eric, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Dennis always reminds me when I come here, he says, we've got Salinas Valley and next door we've got Silicon Valley. And I think your reference to ChatGPT is a great example of how technology is playing a greater and greater role. Next week, I'm heading up to Woodland to the FARA conference. And so I just want to kind of change the subject a little bit to away from biologicals to ag robotics and automation. Just really interested to find out just how you might be applying ag robotics and automation in your operations at Braga.
So I think first and foremost, the carbon robotics laser weeder, that's no longer a secret. We've got 2 of them. It is revolutionary technology. I mean, the computing power of 24 or 26 Teslas, the most mobile, the most advanced mobile AI computing system ever made. Unbelievable success in that company. We also are using the FarmWise Vulcan on the farm. That's been a good product for us for sure for cultivation. In evaluating, new technology, Walt Duflock and Ben Palone at Western Growers, we get to see stuff as it comes out. I was in Denver last week for a conference, and there's another startup that is looking for a more regenerative way to weed. And so, yeah, and really, data is so much part of it too. And there's a newer startup called Nighthawk, nighthawk.ag, and they have a ChatGPT style AI overlay for all of your databases with OCR, so it can read your PDFs, it understands your Excel files. There's APIs that you can put on top of your sales database and ask it any question that you want. So I've actually populated some of our data in there, and we asked the question, can you give me the copper levels in the soil? And it pulled up all the copper levels in the soil from the complete soil analysis it sees. And I just know my CEO would love to drive by a field and say, how many cartons per acre did we get there? What were our production costs? Who did it go to? And with that style of, technology, you can ask it anything. And I, being a little bit versed in databases and having to design queries to get everything in multiple databases in the company, so much technology being leveraged. And so it's just an exciting space, whether it's robotics, which is going to be the solution for harvest moving forward, and going to need a lot of computing power to get, or even if it's just data management. It's a great space, and it's an important space too. And there's a lot of development, but not a lot of funding right now. So,
question for you. I was really intrigued. I think it was last summer. I think Cambridge Consultants kind of led the charge in it, but one of our friends in the UK, Agritech E, was the name of the group. They put together a study that they basically got the big equipment players, the John Deere's, Case Hollands, et cetera, but then they also got the big biological players, the Cortevas, Bayers, Syngentas, et cetera. I think they were all involved. But the basic idea was, as you get this shift from synthetics to biologicals, what's the equipment impact? Because biologicals are going to be applied differently. And you mentioned carbon robotics. They're great, but if you're 60 days into a lettuce field, they're not necessarily the players. So it could be a different piece of equipment. Is there an observation to be made at this point? And the thing about biologicals, I know it depends on the problem, the crop, but is there an equipment impact in all this? Because this group said there was going to be at some level. So, maybe you end up teeing up something like a Farm NG that an existing tractor, but a smaller modular attachment. How does the equipment thing play out in this shift? in very general terms, because I know it falls under the category of it depends. But any observations there?
Yeah, I think one thing, I was fortunate enough to be back at John Deere in Des Moines with Walt last spring, and that really, I think generally the Salinas Valley sees themselves as really different from what they're doing in the broadacre crops, so corn and soybean. And when I saw their technology presented to us, there's a lot that we could employ that they already have available, but we have to start thinking outside the box a little bit. So equipment is going to change for sure. Just autonomy is key. We need to get California a little bit, more pro autonomy for sure because of our labor situations. And so I don't know what the future holds for equipment, but it is going to be changing, and how we look at farming is going to be changing. And partners like John Deere, partners like, the chemical manufacturers that you spoke about. I'm working with Bayer closely on a number of things all the time, right? So, and even with their seed side, they want to know, how does regenerative practices, help their seed production? Asking them, what are you guys going to do for spinach seed production when we don't have the fungicides that we have right now? Or when those fungicides are less effective on the downy mildew. And so the entire production system from seed to table, we're going to have to look at every single piece and part of it and figure out ways to apply technology and really ensure that we don't miss anything. We need to protect the pollinators so they can pollinate these seed crops at the same time. So every single piece needs to be looked at, including equipment. I'm just not the equipment guy, but it's definitely going to be changing, and autonomy is going to be really important, a really important part of that as well.
Okay.
And looking at what, we need to look what they're doing in Europe. When I was with John Deere in Des Moines with Walt, there was a Florida grower there, and they're doing 3 or 4 things at one time. And instead of going through and doing one pass with the John Deere 6000, they're using 8000s and doing like 3 or 4 things at once. And that is going to be, less labor. It's ultimately going to be less fuel. It's going to be less CO2 when you can cut back on your passes. And so I think we need to start looking around and seeing what other folks are doing internationally and how we can apply those to our production system to start to achieve the outcomes that we need to achieve.
Peter?
Yeah, look, I think you've just touched on a really important point there, Eric, and that's that kind of global lens. It's certainly one of the key dynamics of Platform 10, the fact that we intend to create a global grower field trial system, because we do believe there are opportunities to learn from around the world. And so we'll be making announcements, and this is kind of not an advertisement for Platform 10, but we'll be making announcements fairly soon about a series of field trials that will be taking place outside the US, and they will complement the work that's currently about to be undertaken here in California. And I think those two initiatives mapped will provide growers with far more information, apart from using the counter-seasonal opportunity of kind of speeding up research and analysis, because obviously we'll be working through different cropping seasons. But the other reason why I feel very comfortable here is I mentioned before, Dennis always talks about Silicon Valley and Salinas Valley being adjacent. I actually see there being a kind of merger at the moment. And your reference twice now to ChatGPT. 15 years ago, I was actually based for 5 years in Silicon Valley. Then I was working on 2 technologies. One was called machine learning and one was called natural language processing. Well, about 5 years ago, those were kind of renamed as AI. So I've kind of been around this space for a very long time, from the early days when it was difficult to explain to people what ML was and what NLP was. But of course now ChatGPT is kind of in everyone's dictionary. So really fascinating, though, to hear how you see technology playing that increasingly important role in agriculture, because I think it has got a significant role to play. And I think we're still at the very early stages. And I think at FARA next week, we'll see some great developments from last year, but we're still, in my view, still quite a long way away from where we need to be, particularly with things like harvesting. I think we're still behind the ball game there. But that will come.
Yeah, and you know, part of that, and you know, from working with Walt and hanging out with Western growers, you know, our strategic imperatives have been around harvesting, you know, automation, around biologicals, but then also kind of the whole next gen ag worker type of thing. What's how difficult, the wrong word. What's involved from an execution standpoint on the farm? Is it difficult to, or what are the steps in just training the new workforce, or that'll have to be involved in the execution of this? You know, I know there's programs, whether you go back to the community college or the vendor provides it. What's all of that look like? Because I assume that's going to be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I see something. I see what Rancho Cielo is doing, and I think that that's a really good step in the right direction. You know, kind of getting some more training going. I'll say that, you know, when it comes to operating the carbon robotics laser weeder, we can find those guys. You know, we can find those guys that get paid a better wage. It's a little bit more of a technical job. You know, but we still struggle on, you know, harvesting labor and kind of the down and dirty production side. That's a lot of hard work. And so technology is imperative, you know, to start to really, you know, move folks out of those. And we found that with the carbon robotics laser, we were able to get so many of the people that were weeding our organic spring mix and spinach out of those fields and do a better job weeding at the same time and freeing up that labor to be utilized somewhere else and reducing costs. And so when it comes to this technology component and on the farm, you know, if we can get an ROI on a product, we're looking really hard on it. And because so much of our cost is labor. And so anything that, you know, labor is tight, if anything that can, you know, reduce our need for labor, you know, generate an ROI, is something that we're going to be interested in. And when it comes to harvest, that's a big deal. And I know last year I was in contact with an Israeli harvest robotic startup, and they had folks that they were putting in suits with sensors and VR goggles and, you know, could mimic what the pack was for that day, but it was slow. And I think that, you know, you look at something like what Carbon Robotics has come up with, where that mobile AI computing platform that's so robust and so powerful, that kind of mindset, that kind of data management is going to be what speeds up these harvest operations, what, you know, is going to be the key to unlocking so many different things. I don't think that we're going to have, you know, Elon's new robots out there cutting romaine, but maybe something, you know, harvest machine. And we've seen, you know, some level of robotic broccoli harvest. It's not there yet,
right?
But you know, if it can generate an ROI, it's going to move units. It will fuel that segment even more,
right?
So it's just exciting right now to see kind of everything coming together, right when we need it to.
Yeah, well, no, that's good to hear that phrase. Right when we need it, we need it to. Peter, you know, this is a conversation that can go on forever, but we're gonna let Eric get on with his day, because he's we're not going to tell anyone, but he's on vacation, and so we want to let him enjoy that, and we appreciate him making some time. But any final questions, thoughts?
No, only Eric, just huge thanks. There's been so much really valuable insights, I think, into this podcast. I think it's going to generate a lot of interest, not just here in California, but you know, in my kind of field, which is slightly more offshore. But no, I've personally learnt a lot.
Oh yeah,
and really keen to
this has been terrific.
Review and replay this podcast.
Well, we like all our guests, but this was a good one.
This was a good one, definitely.
Yeah, we've had Kiwis on the ranch the last 2 years in a row prior to the Biological Summit. I imagine we'll have them back next year too. So, it's going to take us all of us, you know, on an international basis, because we're all facing the same challenges to kind of come together and really leveraging everybody else's knowledge base to continue feeding people, which is the ultimate goal, right? So,
no, that's great.
Well, no, and I appreciate the range of things we were able to cover, and you know, in terms of on farm, but also there is the social outcome component to all of this, and I think what you're speaking to, obviously a lot of shifts, but new tools are emerging at the right time. So that speaks to a real, at the end of the day, a real opportunity. So Eric, thanks very much for joining us. We'll give you the last word if you have any. Otherwise, we'll let you carry on.
Go Niners.
I'm in a very political situation at the moment, so I am always go Niners, but I have to throw in go Raiders. But that's just me. So, with that, Eric will let you have at it. Though I think all of Salinas is united in that the Niners need to beat the Chiefs this weekend. So with that, Eric, safe travels, and thanks for joining us. And look forward to seeing you in person.
Thanks very much, Eric.
All right. Thank you.
Great, Peter.
Yeah,
we'll do it again.
We absolutely will. Now that was a great session.
Yeah, no, and I think it really sets up fear above and beyond just we're going to go see equipment. The kind of the and I like the way Eric laid it out. I'm going to take a much harder look at carbon robotics. Like, okay, what's in there again?
Yeah.
Because everyone gets focused on the laser side.
Yeah,
of the
no,
thing,
I absolutely agree. Yeah. But I think it's also that leverage of AI and how that's being leveraged by those
that was
manufacturers.
interesting, particularly as it applies to the trialing standpoint and
Correct.
data and. You've still got X amount of clicks of the dial where the grower is going to be comfortable. But if the data is more certain, I think that's interesting.
Yep. So to Walt and Ben and the others from Western Growers who are going to be there next week, looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah.
And I think today's call has set up some interesting conversations next week.
It has, and those conversations will continue on the Grower Talks.
They will indeed.
Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks,
See you next
Dennis.
go around.
Yeah. All the best. Bye.